Welcome to the Sustainable Region. I'm Vanessa Timmer. In today's episode, we're looking at how cycling infrastructure design choices lowers injury rates and encourages more people to ride their bikes for recreation and transportation. And with me today is UBC professor Eskie. Welcome, Kay.
I'm so glad to be here, Vanessa.
Great. And I understand that you were part of an important study on bicycle safety. Can you give a bit of background on the Cycling in Cities research program?
It's a program of research that does two things. It really focuses on infrastructure, what infrastructure motivates or deters people from cycling, and what infrastructure is safer or more dangerous for cycling.
Thanks, Kay. Now let's learn how different kinds of cycling infrastructure impact injury and participation rates for bicycle riders.
My bottom line message for you today is the proportion of trips by bike is malleable. You can change it. And part of the way you can change it is by doing some of the things that I'm going to talk about today to do with infrastructure. So we did two studies. The first one was an opinion survey, and it was called Cycling in Cities, which is now the name of our program of research. That study was done in Metro Vancouver, and it involved interviewing 1,400 people. And we asked them about 16 different route types, and they were shown pictures of 3 examples of each of those 16 route types, so we knew that what we were asking about was what they were visualizing when they were answering. And I should say that route type came up as the strongest possible motivator and the strongest possible deterrent, especially the safety of route type as a deterrent. The other study we did was in Vancouver City and Toronto City. It was an injury study, and it involved looking at the routes and locations of injuries of about 700 people in the 2 cities. And there we also classified the routes, the places where they were injured, and also randomly selected control sites on the same route that they rode. So one of the things we wanted to do with these 2 studies was see if preferences and safety agree. And what you can see on the vertical axis is route preference, high preference in green at the top, low preference in red at the bottom. And then on the horizontal axis, you can see route safety, high safety in green on the right, low safety in red on the left. And what you can see is, in general, safety and preference agreed, which is not surprising because safety is a huge determinant of what people feel about cycling routes and what they feel about cycling. But there was some thought before these 2 studies were done that people didn't know what was safer and what was less safe. But the most safe routes in the upper right-hand corner are bike-specific facilities, and the lower left corner are the least safe routes and least preferred on busy streets. There was one group that was kind of disappointing that was very preferred, but not particularly safe, and that was multi-use paths. So now what I want to do is show you pictures of each of those route types, or at least a big selection of those route types, and I'm dividing them into 3 different kinds of routes: busy streets, quiet streets, and off-street. So the first street, and the street that we compared all the safety, the injury data to, was a busy street with parked cars and no bike infrastructure at all. This is the most typical street in Vancouver and many of our municipalities in British Columbia. It turned out to be the least safe route type, and it's also, in our opinion survey, the least favored type of route. This is hugely important. If we don't provide routes to destinations that feel comfortable and safe and that are motivators to cycling, then how can we get people to take up transportation cycling? Here is a route type that became popular in the early 2000s, that is Sharrows. This is adding the minimal addition to a busy street route type. These are normally put in Canadian cities on busy streets where there's not quite enough room for a bike lane. And not surprisingly, these turn out to be not particularly safe, and they also remain a deterrent to cycling. You can see this woman is riding smack in the door zone. The next one is adding a painted bike lane, in this case between parked cars and moving cars. And it turns out that this change did not make much of a difference to safety. And it still didn't make much difference to whether or not people feel motivated to cycling. It is slightly safer. You're still dealing with cars on both sides of you. Here is where you start to make a difference to safety and a slight difference to cycling motivation. Putting a bike lane between moving cars and the sidewalk, that is no car parking, that reduced injury risk by about 40%. But it was really a neutral impact on cycling. It doesn't make people feel like they want to cycle, they're not choosing this kind of route, but it's better than the others. You can see still some problems, lots of problems with cars parking in these lanes, dropping off passengers in these lanes, so still not a great route type. And I think if we asked you if you would let your children cycle there alone, many mothers and fathers would say, ugh. Busy streets with a separated bike lane, physically separated bike lane. This is the safest. Here we saw tremendous reductions in injury risk, about 90%. And this was the only route type on a busy street that had a positive rating. And it had a positive rating that was equal to many of the quiet streets and off-street route types. So this is a huge change, a great selection for an arterial or collector.
Welcome back, I'm Vanessa Timmer. You've been watching Metro Vancouver's Sustainability Community Breakfast featuring Kay Eskie, UBC Professor of Population and Public Health. So Kay, what's your wish list for the most effective change for cycling infrastructure?
So the most important thing is providing a network of separated routes. You can't just have separated routes from place to place, but you have to connect them. And when you do that, you see tremendous increase in cycling, which is good for everyone. So a quiet residential street we did find is quite a bit safer. It reduces risk by about 50% compared to a busy street without any bike infrastructure. It had a neutral impact on cycling, which is interesting to me. I love these routes myself, no matter what. In most places, changing it to a bike route means that when you come to the intersection with a collector or an arterial, there's at least a mechanism for you to be able to cross it, a bicyclist-activated traffic signal, and that made a big difference. On quiet streets, the safest route type, now we're talking about a 70% reduction in injury risk, is a bike route with traffic diversion. And here you can see an example of traffic diversion. We called anything that reduced or completely blocked traffic turning from an arterial into the bike route, a traffic diverted street. So this made a big difference. What about off-street? These were very popular routes for bicyclists, and so let's talk about those. So sidewalks, of course, it's illegal in British Columbia for people to ride on sidewalks, except children. These turn out to be less safe. Why are they less safe? Well, there's lots of things. There's barriers, there's pedestrians, often uneven pavement. A big thing you can see in the inset on the far right side at the bottom is arriving at an intersection in the direction opposite to traffic. We found that this greatly increased injury risk. Multi-use paths were the second most popular route type in our opinion survey. People love these, but we were disappointed in our injury study to find out that they weren't as safe as many of the other route types that were more bicycle specific. Why is it? Well, I think most of our multi-use paths, not only do they mix pedestrians and cyclists, but they're designed to be interesting. They often have street furniture, posts. They're often curvy, like you can see in the inset at the top right. They have terrible sight lines, which is a bad thing when you're mixing people traveling at two very different speeds. They often don't have lights at night. So all those things mean that you have a more hazardous situation. Bike paths. Bike paths were the top preferred route type for all cyclist types. So the strongest cycling motivator, we have them in our parks, we have them along waterways. They're often linear routes, which is fantastic. They're good sort of between home and destination rides for many people. But they too were not as safe as we had hoped they would be. And again, there's a lot of variability in how these are constructed. They suffer from some of the same problems of multi-use paths, but not as badly. They are often have barriers. I love this picture. It's not from the Vancouver area, but there are plenty of examples in the metro area. Why do we have posts everywhere? Just think of kids trying to ride in between. You know what they're going to do? They're going to look at that post, and when they look at that post, they're going to hit that post. And I've ridden with kids who've done exactly that. So it's a terrible design feature. We did a subsequent analysis of what caused crashes, and on multi-use paths and bike path, obstacles are a huge source of the crash circumstances. You can see in the bottom right an example of a much better design for bike paths and pedestrian path, clear separation of the two modes of travel, excellent sight lines, nice wide pathways, and lighting at night. So to conclude, I'd like to leave you with this message. Our study, in my view, says that there are 3 route types for the 3 different scenarios that are really the ideal to choose. Busy streets, we're talking separated bike lanes or cycle tracks or protected bike lanes, all those terms have been used. That is really the only thing that's going to get a change in who goes to work or to shop by bike. On quiet streets, bike routes with traffic diversion. It can't be allowed to let tons of traffic there. It will discourage people. Off-street, bike-only paths with a lot of attention to the design features. This will be your ideal 3 route types.
Your guide to adult toilet training. Tip number 1, the unflushables. When you flush disposable wipes, they make your toilet and our sewer system work a lot harder, causing backed up pipes, flooded basements, and spills into our environment. The only things that should go in your toilet are pee, poo, and toilet paper. Remember, even if they say they're flushable, wipes go in the garbage. Never flush wipes.
Welcome back. I'm Vanessa Timmer. You've been watching the Metro Vancouver Sustainable Community Breakfast featuring Kate Eskie, UBC Professor of Population and Public Health. So there's a lot of great information in that presentation. What would you say are the kind of key takeaways?
Well, there are 3 main things. A very simple set of great designs. If it's along a busy street, then a separated bike lane, physically separated bike lane that keeps the cars away from where the cyclists are. If it's on a quiet street, it should have low traffic, it should have diversion at arterials, and it should have a way for cyclists to get across the street. And then the one that people like the most is off-street bike paths, but they need some special consideration too. They should have good sight lines, they should have lighting at night, and they shouldn't have bollards and street furniture all over the place that act as obstacles. And those 3 are very simple. They're like what the Dutch do and the Danish do, and they make all the difference.
What's next in the Cycling in Cities program?
A third of the crashes in Toronto, in the area that we studied, were people slipping or getting caught in streetcar tracks. So it's a really important issue, both for Toronto, where there are streetcars, and also in the future for cities that are considering streetcars.
Thank you, Kay, for bringing such a great perspective on cycling infrastructure.
Oh, it was great to be here. Thank you.
You can watch all Metro Vancouver's sustainable community breakfast events online at metrovancouver.org, along with past episodes of the Sustainable Region, Metro Vancouver Close-Up, and many other videos on regional topics. On behalf of all of us at the Sustainable Region, I'm Vanessa Timmer. Thanks for watching.